Welcome to Let's Talk About It with Amy Schreiber, where we talk about life's journey, the real estate market, and everything in between. I am your host, Amy Schreiber. I'm a local realtor in the Tampa Bay, Florida area. I am joined by my co host, Katie Easling. So, Katie, what are we talking about today?
I'm really excited about this episode. The last episode, you were just deciding to leave Checkers and in what ended up kind of being a toxic environment, one that you could no longer grow in. And you were pursuing the intent of joining a global company because you were also starting your international business degree. So tell us, where are we at in that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you recapped beautifully. So obviously, knowing I wanted to pursue a global organization, I really needed to start identifying those companies that I wanted to, learn more about and see if they had any positions that intrigued me, right? So this took a while. It wasn't quick. And again, I had to take time, right? Because I wanted to improve myself, right? From my financial perspective and to really being at a great company, which is critical, right? As I was focused on moving up that corporate ladder. So I was able to really hone in over those probably 6 months. At the end of that, I really started pursuing a couple local organizations that obviously had the global expansion, right? They were global companies. And I'll remember they were both in the running, but when I got the call for JP Morgan, which again, JP Morgan at that level, 200,000 plus employees globally, that's kind of nerve wracking, right? But it was just I remember looking at, I spent a few months looking at their site, trying to identify positions that really fit me, coming from my background to now financial. I had never worked obviously in a bank or a financial institution. So it's interesting. I There was one position that I look back at it today, and I've had conversations with my previous manager, over the years, but that position on paper, it just translated so perfectly to what I had done, right, in my past, from Checkers to the uniform company, etc. But it was in a totally different language. It was financial versus, I guess, just business, but it blended so well for me. So I took the risk. I submitted my resume and ended up getting a call probably a week later from the recruiter. They do that, right? To kind of, pre-interview before moving to the next with the hiring manager. And, she reached out to me and, I gave her, that 2 minute blurb of who I am, what I've done. And, then we set up some time to interview the hiring manager. And I'll tell you, walking away, even from that first initial interview, was like, oh my gosh, from where I've been, right, to now potentially having the opportunity to interview at that level was just amazing.
So tell us about that first initial interview at JP Morgan, at the offices. That had to be incredibly intimidating. I mean, JP Morgan is a globally known name. It's really incredible. So tell us more.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. So I remember, we set up a time for the interview and I am prompt. Well, actually, I get everywhere like 15 minutes early, right? Because I don't want, if there's something that happens, I'll be able to recover quickly. Well, I ended up being late, which I never am. And that's just not what you need to do on your first interview with this global organization. But I got lost, and I did call her. She knew in advance that I was running a little late. I obviously apologized, and I was like, "Oh dear God." So I remember finally, I think I was maybe 10 minutes late, but finally getting up to the campus. There is a guard station. I mean, you have to be on the list at the time, who you're meeting. They then, call, you have to show your ID. They call the hiring manager and get the final approval. Yes, you can send her in. And then, you get your little pass for your car, and then finding a parking spot. I mean, there was a 3 building campus, but still that just the intimidation of, oh my God, this is like really secure. What am I doing here? Am I supposed to be here? And then, finding a parking spot in the garage, and then walking up to the building, trying to open the door. You can't, right? Because you got to buzz in. You buzz in, they let you in, and then you've got to go to the guard station and wait for the hiring manager to come get you. So it was very, very intimidating. But at the end of the day, I was confident enough to know, although I still had this imposter syndrome in the back of my mind, right? It still was, Amy, put on your big girl, pants, and just do this, right? You deserve it just like anybody else does. You've worked hard. You know that this could fit if you fit in, with the manager and all that good stuff. So yeah, it was crazy. It was intimidating, but I was ready.
So tell us about that interview, because I know you and I talked a little bit before. You really made a connection with that hiring manager that was really special to hear and really opened the door for what would come next.
Totally agree. I was very lucky. My first manager, like you said, she came down, we went up to her office. And of course, I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm late. I'm never late, or I was late. And then, she was like so sweet. She broke the ice with a story about her interview. She had went to an interview as well, and she was very nervous. She ended up falling out of the chair. So again, we had a laugh. She made me feel really comfortable. Her name is Carol. She's a great friend still today. But yeah, it was just, that was, I appreciated that because she didn't have to do that, right? To kind of make me feel just a little bit better, so we could start our conversation, right? To see if I'd be a fit. And so anyways, I appreciate that. But going through the interview, talking about just what I could bring to the table almost immediately, as it was written from my resume to the job description. Like I said, it was kind of totally different languages, but it made sense. And as her and I were communicating, and I was sharing how, for this particular skill set, this is what I did, this is how I did it, or what have you. She was impressed as well. She also had that same kind of thought of, this is a totally different industry, but yet you could come in and start running. You know what I mean? And yes, there was going to be a lot of time for growth and understanding their systems, their processes, right? I mean, this is like I said, huge organization globally. So, there are a lot of processes in place, and, but anyways, it was just amazing how we both connected, and not only, person to person, but also within what needed to be done in that position. And, so again, I felt really well coming out of the interview. Things were obviously, I think, a couple days later, I got a call from the recruiter. And she said, we loved you. We want to offer you X, and we'll get that paperwork submitted to you. And for the first time in my life, I fought for myself. I had the courage to say, no, that number is not good enough. That number was a lot more than what I was making at Checkers, but I wanted more. I deserved more, right? And I'm glad that I had the courage to say, no, I want this. just because I make this and you're still giving me a great, increase, no, I'm not going to leave here for anything less than X. And, I ended up getting it. Or it may have been maybe 1,000 or 2,000 less, but at the end of the day, I want to say it was about $20,000 increase per year, right? That I eventually got. So again, that continued forward movement. And it was like, I'm dealing with the big dogs here with JP Morgan. They can afford to pay, right? And I still went in a little too low. Dang it. But anyways, that's okay. But, I stood up. I let the imposter syndrome or the maybe I'm not good enough mentality that comes through our minds like a minute every whatever, but I was like, no, I'm going to stand up for me. And that was probably the first time I truly realized my growth, what I had overcome over those previous 10 years of, working at the uniform manufacturing company and then Checkers. And it was like, wow, this is great. But then, after getting in, because I think I had to give 3 weeks notice. Again, they needed to try to find a replacement. I mean, I had a lot of knowledge that I, wanted to share with the next person coming in. But yeah, so then getting, starting that first day at JP Morgan, very intimidating. It was that I think I was uncomfortable in my skin every single day of those 10 years that I worked at that company. And I love it. I think that's a good thing, right? You never want to get comfortable or too comfortable, in any position, I think. You always kind of want to have that, open mind, I guess. But working and having that opportunity to start working for this global organization that was going to test me, that was going to challenge me like I had never been challenged before, right? Sitting at tables with men and just a couple women at the table, eventually, as I grew within the position I was first hired for, was intimidating. That's where that, and my goodness, should I be here? We all know what my past was like, right? From high school dropout, obviously successful along the way, and then getting this position at JP Morgan, which was a dream for me at the time, right? I had always envisioned myself successful in a corporate atmosphere, and just loving what I do. And this was that next step of really, really challenging situations, probably almost every day of that 10-year period. And I grew so much. I don't think I realized, even going through this exercise, going through history, I don't think I realized how much I really, truly started to grow and become who I am today. It started with JP Morgan. I mean, the other companies, yes, they had their objective, right? Or within my career success or path. But with JP Morgan, this was going to totally revamp who I was, allow me to reestablish myself even at a better level, a growth level. So and then of course I would stay 2 years, I think, in that position, and then decide to move on to another role within the organization. And I think we'll talk about that next week.
I'm excited to hear about it. And I love what you talked about, like not being complacent, not being comfortable in your own position, previous there in Checkers, because it's so easy for us to get stuck in situations that aren't serving us, and to really stretch yourself and grow into JP Morgan is just a great story, and it's a great reminder to push past that imposter syndrome that we all have. And
yes, it's so imperative. I mean, and sometimes it's tough, but most of the time when I get the thought, it's quickly, no, I'm not going to allow that thought in my mind, because I quickly have to remember, you came from here, you did all this in between, plus plus school, right? Not only progressing from a career perspective to somewhere I never thought I would be able to even dream of, right? To, having school behind me, getting all those accomplished. Yeah, it's never be complacent. And that's one thing I've always embraced change. It's just I've always been that change agent for whatever reason. And yeah, bring it on.
love it. And I cannot wait for next week's episode. Talk to you then.